Good day, grade 12. So for this day, we're going to have our class in Philippine Politics and Governance. And for our lesson for this week, and that is all about the elections in the Philippines. And for our most essential learning competency for this lesson is to analyze the nature of elections and political parties in the Philippines. So to start our discussion, we all know that elections are special events in the Philippines and they have become part of the national consciousness. Well, in fact, when we say election season, that usually attracts a great number of media coverage from the moment a politician announces his or her intention to run for office up to the campaign period, then the counting of the last votes after the election and the proclamation of winners. But what do you think is the reason why elections are given great importance in our country? Well, elections are given great importance in our country because they are the mechanism through which citizens are able to express their right to choose their leaders, and elections are also a democratic exercise of the citizens' right to be involved in government affairs. So therefore, as citizens, we must have knowledge of the electoral process, how candidates and voters interact throughout this process, and the various agencies and groups that play a role in the elections. So by understanding the electoral process and our role in it, we will be able to help address the challenges and issues that affect elections in our country. So for our discussion, we will be discussing the points that I have mentioned, which includes the electoral process, the interaction of the candidates and the voters, as well as the agencies and groups that are involved in every elections. But before anything else, let us define first what is elections. So when we say election, that is the formal decision-making process by which citizens choose public officials. And the right to participate in election is what we call suffrage. And that is an important right of the citizens. But is the term suffrage only refers to the right to vote of the citizens? Well, the term suffrage also means the right of an individual citizen to run for office. According to the Article 5 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, it sets the conditions by which Filipino citizens may exercise suffrage. So, for a citizen to exercise suffrage, or for a citizen to be able to run for a position or to vote during elections, he or she must be at least 18 years old and resident of the Philippines for at least a year. So later on, we will be discussing further what are the qualifications for a certain individual to be qualified as a voter during elections. So this time, let us discuss now the Omnibus Election Code and election organizations in the Philippines. This Omnibus Election Code, or the Batas Pambansa bilang 881, it is where the electoral process in the Philippines is being discussed. And this code contains all of the rules governing the conduct of elections in the Philippines, which includes qualifications for aspiring election candidates and date important to the election process. And aside from this, it also contains provisions on the role of the Commission on Elections, or what we commonly known as the COMELEC. So as COMELEC being a government agency, what do you think is its main function in the conduct of the elections in the Philippines? Well, when we say Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, it is the main government agency that oversees elections in the country and decides on all matters concerning the electoral process. So the primary goal of the COMELEC is to ensure the conduct of free, fair, and honest elections. And as such, The COMELEC is also mandated by the Constitution to be independent from all the branches of the government. In addition to that, during the election period, the COMELEC is also authorized to supervise and control all government agencies, public officials, and government employees whose duties are related to the conduct of the elections. So, for example to this is that they can direct the police and the armed forces to secure areas where election-related violence is rampant to ensure the conduct of free and fair elections. Aside from that, the COMELEC is also authorized by the Congress to recommend the election budget and impose disciplinary actions against violators of election laws and investigate cases of election-related crimes. And for your information, the COMELEC is composed of the chairman, or what we call the COMELEC chairman, and 6 commissioners who are all appointed by the Philippine president. And our current COMELEC chairman right now is Commissioner Sheriff M. Abbas. But aside from the COMELEC, there are also organizations that keep close watch on the entire election process and perform other election-related tasks. And these groups are referred to as the election watchdogs. And who are these election watchdogs? First on the list, it is the Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, or what we commonly known as the PPCRV. So what is the role of the PPCRV? So for the information of everybody, PPCRV is accredited by COMELEC in 2001, and it serves as a citizens arm of the COMELEC. And the PPCRV also superheads programs specifically aimed at monitoring election results, providing education to the voting public, and assisting voters in polling precincts on election day. And aside from that, the PPCRV is also composed of members drawn from various sectors of the society. And the PPCRV is also non-partisan and independent from any government entity. So therefore, we can clearly say that the PPCRV, or the Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting, is not under the government, and they are not also under the Commission on Elections, but they are still related because the PPCRV would play an important role during the elections or during the election day. Next, another watchdog is the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections, or what we commonly known as the NAMFREL. So, aside from the PPCRV, the NAMFREL also coordinates with them and the National Press Club of the Philippines, or what we know as the NPC, in performing its functions. And it is also under the COMELEC and helps spread awareness on election-related matters. And aside from that, the NAMFREL also conducts information dissemination campaigns and organize forums involving the election candidates. So if you have noticed during the 2016 presidential elections, there are a lot of TV stations who have conducted debates. So the one who organizes it is the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections, or NAMFREL. The NAMFREL also is mandated to inform the COMELEC regarding violations of the Omnibus Election Code. And NAMFREL also implements Operation Quick Count, which is a parallel counting of votes in order to monitor the elections. So, aside from the COMELEC monitoring the count, or the returns of the votes, NAMFREL also do quick count, and as well as the PPCRV. So this time, let's talk about the Philippine electoral process. We all know that the Philippine elections are held both at the national and local levels. Voters elect the president and vice president also electing senators, district and party list representatives, governors, mayors, local council members, and barangay officials. And we are also aware that the whole election process involves the participation of both the candidates and the voters. So, on the part of the candidates, so let's begin with the candidates. So, on the part of the candidates, what do you think are the activities that they are into during the conduct of the elections? So, to answer that one, on the part of the candidates, their involvement officially starts with their submission of the certificate of candidacy, or what we commonly know as the COC, and they're going to submit that one at the COMELEC. So by filing the COC, the aspiring candidate formally expresses his or her desire to campaign and run for office. But the question now, does it mean that whoever submits a COC would be automatically entitled to a spot in the electoral or to the electoral race? To answer that one, the COMELEC may deem an applicant as a nuisance candidate or with intent to mock the election process. So a candidate may be considered disqualified before, during, and after the elections due to, first, bribery of votes or bribery of voters, acts of violence and terrorism, receiving donations from foreign governments, and engaging in black propaganda against a fellow candidate. So those are the points, or those are the grounds wherein a certain candidate for election could be disqualified. So now, after the candidate will file the certificate of candidacy, then the next step for that would be the campaign period. So during the campaign period, it is where the candidates and political parties engage in various activities to convince voters to elect them into office. So let's talk more about it. So during the campaign period, just like what I've said a while ago, that the candidates and political parties engage in the various activities to convince voters to elect them into office. And during also the campaign period, that is the time where they discuss their advocacies and prospective projects to the voters. And they also attempt to create a unique mark on the minds of the voters, and these are done through personal visits to constituent areas, campaign ads on television, radio, and other forms of media, and even participation in election debates or forums on television or in other public venues, such as, or it could possibly be done in social media or in radio as well. And aside from that, there are also limitations as to the day of the campaign period for a specific candidate or to a specific position. For example, presidential and vice presidential candidates are entitled to a 90-day campaign period. So they're only allowed to campaign for 90 days. And candidates for seats in Congress, which includes who are running for the position of senator and as well as for the position of congressman or representatives, for local government as well as for local government positions as well, they are only allowed to campaign for 45 days only. And for the campaign period for barangay elections, they are only limited to 15 days. And it is really important to note that the candidates are not allowed to campaign on the day before and during the day of the elections itself. So after the candidate will file the certificate of candidacy or the COC, then after the time, it is now the campaign period. Then after the campaign period, that would be the election day. So before we proceed on the election day, let's now go to the side of the voters. What are the roles of the voters during the entire election season? So, So voters are not only to pay attention to the activities during the campaign period, but also to actively communicate with the candidates. And this is so they can forward concerns that they would like to address to the candidates, and of course question the candidates regarding their electoral platforms and using the information gained during the campaign period. And the voters also are expected to elect the most capable candidates in the government. But the question now is, how can a Filipino participate as a voter in the election? Well, he or she must meet certain qualifications. So, in order for a Filipino to participate as a voter in the elections, he or she must meet these qualifications. Number 1, he or she must be at least 18 years old by the day of the elections. But in the case of the Sangguniang Kabataan, voters must be 15 to 30 years old. Second, he or she must be a resident of the country for at least a year. So he or she must be a resident of our country, which is the Philippines, so for at least a year. Then third, a resident. He or she must be a resident of the place where he or she will be voting for at least 6 months. 6 months. Then, fourth one, he or she must not be disqualified by law. So what are the cases where a certain Filipino will be disqualified to vote? So, a Filipino may be considered disqualified to vote if he or she is found to have, first, he or she been imprisoned for at least 1 year without pardon or amnesty. So that is a ground. Second, if he or she committed crimes against national security. So kapag yun nangyari, that certain individual is not allowed to vote or to participate in the elections. Then lastly, being deemed mentally incapable to vote. So those are the grounds where a certain Filipino may be considered disqualified to vote during the elections. So the second question now is, where can a potential voter apply for registration? So they can apply at the COMELEC office in his or her local community or in the locality where he or she is expected to vote. So as of the 2016 and 2019 national elections, voter registration features the use of biometrics. So when a voter registers, his or her fingerprints are scanned and registered in the COMELEC database so that on the election day, a voter's identity is confirmed by checking voter information and fingerprint. And the COMELEC is also doing this to ensure proper identification at the polls and prevent fraud. And you know what? I know that most of you grade 12 students are already 18 years old. So therefore, I think this would be the best time for you to go to the nearest COMELEC office. I think it is located at the Magsaysay Park. So I am encouraging everyone that you register as early as now, because next year, 2022, that would be the national elections, which will be held on the second Monday of May next year. So that will be a presidential elections wherein we are going to elect our new president of our country. So aside from the regular voters who will vote on the day of the elections, we ginatawag na absentee votings, or what we also known as the absentee voters. Who are these absentee voters? So those who are unable to vote in their respective localities on the day of the elections may apply for absentee voting. And these absentee voters include people who need to perform vital tasks on election day, such as public officials and employees, military and police officers, and journalists and other media workers. But aside from them, Overseas Filipino workers, or the OFW, may also apply for absentee voting to help them avoid the inconvenience of returning to the country to participate in the elections. And they are going to vote 1 week earlier than the rest of the voting public. So in summary, the candidate and the voters have an interaction during the election season. So the candidate will going to file the COC. So these are the activities that we're going to perform by the candidate for elections during the election season. So the first step, he or she will going to file the COC. Then after that one, they will be proceeding at the campaign period. And the voters as well will going to register at the nearest COMELEC office. Then after that one, then they will be proceeding all together at the campaign period. Then after the campaign period, next to that would be the election day. So just like what I've said a while ago, that the elections in the Philippines are conducted during the second Monday of May, and that is for the national elections. But for the barangay elections and Sangguniang Kabataan elections, it usually takes place on the last Monday of October. So these provisions are stated in the Constitution, in the 1987 Constitution? Well, the second Monday of May, it is stipulated in there. But in the case of the barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan, where the elections usually conducted on the last Monday of October, it cannot be found on the 1987 Constitution, but it can be found in the Omnibus Election Code. So this time, let us talk about the other electoral events. So what are these events that I am referring to? So elections may be postponed. So it is possible that the elections could be postponed if they may be hampered by violence, terrorism, loss, or destruction, or paraphernalia, or records, as well as natural calamities. So if one of those that I have mentioned, so most probably the COMELEC will declare postponement of the elections, and the COMELEC also will declare failure of elections in certain areas of the country due to the same reasons, and as well as widespread of electoral fraud or pandadaya. So those are the grounds. Then, aside from that, napo tayo ginatawag na special elections. And these special elections, which shall be held not later than 30 days after the declaration or postponement of failure of elections. So for example, next year in 2022, so usually we will have our national elections by the second Monday of May. So if ever in a certain locality wherein there are discrepancies na nahitabo, could be there is violence or there is a natural calamity that happened in that area, so the COMELEC will declare postponement of elections. Then the COMELEC will reschedule that one, and it should not be conducted beyond 30 days from the day of the actual elections. So aside from the special elections, we have also what we call the snap elections. So actually, snap elections happened in the Philippines. Nationally, it happened once, and that was during the time of President Ferdinand E. Marcos and his challenger, Corazon C. Aquino. It is held earlier than the date prescribed by the law. So, and I am referring to the snap elections. It should be held earlier than the date prescribed by the law. And in the 1985, President Ferdinand Marcos, just like what I said a while ago, that he called for snap elections to be held in the following year in an effort to reassert his legitimacy and power in the government. Because what happened during the actual elections, President Ferdinand Marcos won. And there are a lot of people who are rallying at the streets, especially at Metro Manila, that they are na sinasabi that there was a fraud happening during the election. So to reassert the legitimacy and power of the former president Ferdinand P. Marcos, so he called for the snap elections. And embroiled in controversy, so as numerous cases of electoral fraud and violence were reported during that time. Marcos won the elections, but the results were contested by various sectors, and the protest that resulted eventually led to the 1986 revolution. So, because of that, President Marcos was not able to win the people. That's why Corazon C. Aquino took the place of the office of the president during that time. And that was in 1986. So now, let's talk about your activity in your learning activity sheets as well as in your study guide sheets. So actually, there are 4 activities in there. So I hope you got something from our discussion, and I hope that you also read your study guide sheet so that you could have an idea what the elections in the Philippines is all about. So for your activity, that is a true or false activity. So for the direction of this activity, you're going to write T if the statement is true, and you're going to write F if the statement is false. So let us try to answer 2 questions from this activity. So let's try to read this. The first item. So true or false, every Filipino should be 18 years old or above on the day of elections to exercise their right to vote. So what do you think is the answer for this? So is it 18 years old? Okay, so that for a Filipino or for a certain Filipino individual to vote during the elections, he must be at least 18 years old on the day of the elections. Okay, second. Next is COMELEC is composed of a chairman and 6 commissioners who are natural-born citizens of the Philippines. Again, COMELEC is composed of a chairman and 6 commissioners who are natural-born citizens of the Philippines. What do you think is the answer for this? Okay, so the answer for this is true. So you're going to answer the rest of the items for this activity. So I hope you will got it all right, because most of the items here can be, the answers can be found on our discussion and as well as on your study guide sheets. And for your next activity, activity 2, and that is entitled Let's Reflect. So you are going to answer 3 questions here. So the first question, what is an election for? So why are we having election? What is that for? Second, what will people get in casting their votes during elections? Is it really important to participate during elections? What do you think will happen if you will not participate? Third, what is your opinion about vote buying? So you are going to write your answers in a yellow paper, and please answer the questions completely. And for your third task, this will be a reading assignment. So you are going to read the definition and nature of political parties, which can be found in your study guide sheet. So actually, it is you can find this one, the definition and nature of political parties, after activity 2 in your study guide sheets and learning activity sheets. So I want you to read that one. Don't worry, that is very easy, and when you're going to read it, that is very comprehensible. So I want you to read that one. Then after reading it, you are going to answer activity number 3, activity number 4, and the last activity, which is the assessment. Okay, so please answer these 5 activities, and you are going to submit this one by Monday next week. So hopefully you will finish it all. So if you have questions, or if you want to have some, if you have some, clarifications or queries with regards to our discussion or topic for this week, just send me a personal message or a private message in Messenger, or you can also direct your message in our group chat or in our Facebook group. So I will be uploading the video, or I will be uploading this video lesson in our Facebook group. Then after that one, parehas pa rin, you need to comment your reflection and insights about our lesson for this week, which is all about the elections in the Philippines, and that is worth 50 points. Okay, so I think that would be all. Thank you so much for watching this video lesson. So see you next week, grade 12.